Hello, everyone, and welcome to Intellectual Intercourse. I'm Tranna,
And I'm Adam.
and this is our new podcast.
Can you believe it?
I can't believe it. And of course, it's natural for things to be a little awkward at first. This is your first podcast, Adam?
It is my first podcast, so audience, please bear with me, but I'm not going to disappoint.
I love the confidence.
Yeah.
Are you scared of making yourself more public through this project?
Not at all. I've actually see it as an opportunity to become more public and put things out there that typically I would hide or not disclose. So I think that is going to be an interesting tool for me to basically lay everything out there.
I'm excited. And I think that's a big reason that we wanted to do this. Like we've been friends for a really long time.
Yeah, so I calculated it over the weekend. We met in 2007, so that's like almost 17 years, I believe.
Yeah.
It's kind of wild when I think about it. Even stepping back and prior to this moment, I feel like we need to acknowledge this moment. It
Yeah.
feels so much bigger than just this podcast. We've been through this really long journey as knowing each other, and we've had ups and downs, moments where we didn't really know each other at all, moments where we didn't even speak to each other deliberately, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But I feel like we're kind of on the cusp of something here that feels much bigger than we both realize.
Yeah. I think that I'm fortunate to have a lot of really great people in my life. You're definitely someone that I consider one of the most important people in my life. And I think that we have conversations or types of conversations that I don't necessarily have with anyone else. Not that those are better or worse. It's not like I'm not trying to qualify our conversations, but I think that we like to push each other and we like to provoke each other.
Yes.
And I do believe that there is a kind of art to conversation. And so I think for me, it's like part of the motivation of wanting to do this podcast is to be able to hold on to some of the things that we share because conversation is so ephemeral,
Exactly.
Especially when it's just between two people one-on-one or even through texts, like they get erased eventually. So I think it's nice to have this documentation.
Exactly. And I think over the past few years, we've had these like phenomenal conversations that we've lost. And I think giving a platform to be able to hold on to them into some ways kind of a nice to have a memento. But I think like one of the things that I enjoy the most about our conversations is that we're not afraid to go really deep and provoke each other, as you said, but then in like the split second sort of change and become the most ridiculous conversation that we've ever had. I think that's kind of a big premise of what we're trying to achieve with this podcast is that hopefully we'll go somewhere deep and you'll think, oh my God, they're crazy. And then all of a sudden around the corner, you're going to just die laughing because we realize how ridiculous we are in certain moments.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't think we take ourselves too seriously. Yeah. And the title of our show, Intellectual Intercourse, is very pretentious.
Yes.
It comes from an Alanis Morissette lyric from her song All I Really Want from Jagged Little Pill. And obviously Alanis is a big inspiration for both of us. But yeah, I do think people should be aware that this podcast, Intellectual Intercourse, is the opposite of small talk. But we absolutely reserve the right to just be really stupid.
Yeah, and we welcome it. We want to encourage stupidity from each of us because, based on experiences that we've had in our lives, it's a way of processing and understanding that you need that sort of balance between pushing yourself, but then also just looking at yourself and laughing at it.
Yeah. And hopefully people will connect, people will engage. I do think we're like letting people into the types of conversations that would ordinarily be very private or secretive. But it is nice to let people in.
Yes.
So just so our listeners get a better sense of who we are, and I'm almost scared to ask this, but how would you describe me to someone you don't know?
I mean, I think it's kind of a challenge because you have such a public persona. So a lot of people do know a lot about you, but I've also known you for a long time. So I've known you when your life was a lot more private than it is today. And I think even still that you have a public life, there's things about you that I think people don't know. I took some time over the weekend to just jot down some notes, and the first thing that I put in all caps is Tranna does not do domestic labor.
That's true. I mean, I do it because I have to, but I really don't like to do it.
Yeah.
And yeah, even when I was in Big Brother, like I cooked once, I think, out of the like 400 days that I was there.
Yeah. Sometimes when you come over to our place for the weekend, you just state, I'm not cooking. I don't do this. And I find that kind of bold, but also kind of liberating that you're like, this is just not something that I do. I wasn't meant to do it. I do not cook. I am not going to be tending to you.
That's very true. I do. I mean, I have to just own it, I provide the entertainment. I can't do it all.
I made like a long list of other things. So I don't know, like, do you want to go back and forth? Do you want to say some things about me?
Yeah.
What was the big headline that you made for me?
The big headline that I made for you. Well, you're a complex person, as everyone is, obviously. I think that on the surface, if someone doesn't know you, you may come off as a bit aloof or maybe a bit hard to reach. But you're very warm, you're very caring, you're very mindful of other people and what they may be feeling. And I think that you have a really good aura and presence when you do let people in. I think you're one of the most generous people that I've ever met. But then simultaneously, you also have the ability to cut someone out of your life if you have to, if the relationship is no longer working for you, which I do admire. Even though I've been on the receiving end of it in the past, I respect that, just because I think that that's something that I have a really hard time doing in my life, is being sort of decisive or setting boundaries. Obviously it's all more complex than that. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it can be very difficult to read who I am because I'm typically just navigating the world with trying to reveal as little as possible and an attempt to feel that that's safety, that the less that somebody knows about me, the more safe that I feel. So it's quite disorienting. I sometimes, if I'm unsure about how I feel in a situation, people don't get to access like a true or core version of myself. So I think it's a really good call out that it's something that I use this as a strategy to feel safe in the world. And it's something that I don't like, and it's something that I'd love to change. But hopefully in this podcast, or my hope or my ambition for it is that I can bring that authenticity and truth forward.
Yeah, because you are a very authentic person in the sense that, at least that I feel in the way that I know you, you're always very honest with me. You always tell me things like they are. And I think that in turn, because of that, you're someone that I can really trust. I can really trust you to tell me the truth about things, if the truth even exists. But as much as the truth can exist, I feel like you're always pretty on it, I don't feel I never feel like you ever say things to me just to placate me or just to mirror me. I feel like you're always very authentic in how you speak, what you share.
It's funny because there's a transition point when I meet somebody where maybe I've been navigating the relationship from trying to feel safe and not really putting myself out there, but I've at a certain point got enough information to feel safe, and then that warmth comes out, or the directness comes out, or the strong boundary might come out, and it takes somebody a little bit of a minute to re-update their perception of me because they're a bit surprised that I have that ability to be so direct or so cutthroat or whatever the word is, that I didn't let that show up in the beginning of the relationship. So there's always that moment where I'm like, hey, there's a recalibration that needs to happen.
Yeah. I think also you're very quite a quintessential Sagittarius. Like you love your freedom. You don't
Uh-huh.
like to be tied down, although you're also in a really committed
Yeah.
relationship. So again, there are a lot of contradictions within you,
Yeah.
but I know you're someone that really seeks adventure and you're someone who's very curious. And I feel like you're always learning new things. Like there's so many things that you have learned that you've shared with me that have
Hmm.
in turn really changed my perspective on things or just illuminated me to things that I really wasn't aware of.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I think those are also some of your major qualities.
Yeah, I find it so odd or like pretentious to say, but like one of my values is knowledge. Like
Yeah.
this quest or seeking for some sort of truth. That what is truth? I have no idea. But like kind of pulling that in, and then I want the people around me to be pulled into that knowledge and then build upon it and it be this collaborative sharing thing.
Yeah, no, I love that. And yeah, I mean like even like you introduced me to mushrooms,
Yes.
which you had told me about I don't even know like 2 years ago.
Uh-huh.
And I was really curious and then I finally did do it with you and like it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. So, yeah, I love that you bring sort of like newness to my life, like new
Right.
experiences, new knowledge. I love
Illegal
that.
activities.
Illegal activities. You bring drama.
I also wrote that you are a typical Pisces. Um, so it was like really in the top of my list. And I think that your emotions are everywhere in your body. Like there's nowhere in your body that's not like an emotional landscape for you. And I had this little line that I wrote down every time you sigh, it's like you sigh for the entire planet.
I mean, I don't disagree with that. I
Yeah.
think that a lot of Pisces feel like we're carrying the world on our
Yeah.
shoulders. And I definitely feel that. It's not necessarily a productive feeling,
Hmm.
because I'm only one person. But I do care about people. I care about well-being
Hmm.
because I think to me, I think I also have a really innate sense of justice and equality. And I just feel like everything should be so simple.
Uh-huh.
So I think I have a hard time reconciling how out of control so many things are in the world
Sure.
when living and coexisting altogether should be really simple.
Hmm.
So I think I have a hard time, and I
Yeah.
think that a lot of Pisces were sort of caught between our dreamland and the utopia that we sort of envision in our minds and like the very harsh reality of the world. And
Yeah.
sometimes I think there can be like a disconnect between those two things,
Hmm.
and we can be and I often like just feel very overwhelmed very
Yeah.
easily.
I think that we both disagree on how we actually met or like what the actual event was that we
Well,
have
I know.
agreed to disagree on that one. I don't know, but I guess it comes down to like for me, it solidifies when I photographed you once when I was studying in university. And I remember meeting you, and there is a glow or there's an aura about you. Like I remember when I met you, that there's some sort of joy or physicality about your face and your expression and your eyes. Like these things come together and there's a glow. And I can remember, like, in those very early days, we didn't know each other well. We were living in the same neighborhood and we would cross paths on the street and there was like a glow that would exist.
Oh,
And I think that it's really interesting because I don't know if it's like joie de vivre or if there's like this essence that exudes from you. And I think that like there's something to be really held on there and it's important. And I've seen you age and that you've interacted with the world in different ways as I've gotten to know you over the years. And I feel like it's hard to exist in the world today and still have that joy. So it's
do I
like
still have it? Do you think I
I
still
think
have it?
I think you still have it, but I don't know if it's as strong as it was when you were younger. And I saw it when you did mushrooms. It's still there,
Yeah.
but I guess like the pain that I see is I think you genuinely are a good person and you just genuinely want good things for everybody. And even for people that you logically or emotionally don't think deserve it, and it breaks your world,
Yeah.
or why can't everybody just want that for everybody else?
Oh my God, like you just said it so perfectly. That's what I think about all the time.
Hmm.
Like, why doesn't everyone just want that for everyone? I
Right.
think about that all the time. I think that's like the big question of like the big question that just lives inside of me all the time. And I think that, I don't know, I would like to believe that we all sort of have a version of that glow, but I do think as you get older, the more you see, the more you experience, the more disillusioned you become. um, I think subconsciously I'm trying to hold on to it,
Yeah.
you know? But even when I like listen back to like I used to do a podcast called Chosen Family, and I remember at one point like listening to one of our really early episodes and I could hear a joyfulness in my voice that isn't there anymore,
Right.
you know? Yeah, it's
I I have this visual of you. It was quite early of us knowing each other, and we were both at the same Kylie Minogue concert many years ago. I think it was the
the Aphrodite tour.
Aphrodite tour in Montreal, and I can't believe I just called it a conference. It's like conference for the queers. Kylie Minogue is
I
in
would love
town.
Kylie to do a conference instead of a concert.
I was way in the back, like I remember having a ticket for way up in the highest bleachers of the Bell Center, and she couldn't sell out the venue. So when you would go in to go to your seat, they gave me a new ticket, which was closer down to the
Right.
floor. So I got upgraded.
Yeah.
And I was there in so much pain. I had slipped and I had like a torticollis, like a neck spasm.
Oh,
And I just remember like having the great time. It's one of my favorite albums from Kylie. Fever played, which I loved. And I remember seeing you on the screen. Like the cameras were going around the audience, and you were there, and you had like this glitter hair,
yeah, I had a silver wig.
joy on your face. There was like this smile that was just like youth. Like it could have been just an ad for youth.
Well, I also was very young then.
Yeah.
But I remember that night vividly, and I still think that, like, in general, concerts
Yeah.
are like one of my happiest places.
Yeah.
Like, music is such an important part of my life, and
Yeah.
all of these artists that I listen to, like, they really do, they have shaped me as a
Yeah.
person. So when I do get the chance to see them in person in concert, like, it is really like a spiritual
Yeah.
experience.
Completely.
But just for the record, before you photographed me, that was the first time that we met face to face.
Okay.
But we actually started talking on this site that I don't know if it still exists, but all the Montreal gays know about gay411.com. And you were on there. And I remember we used to like chat on MSN.
Okay.
And I think you had like a Flickr account
Uh-huh.
with like pictures of
Oh, I
yourself.
did.
Yeah. And I mean, at that time, you were just so mysterious to me. Like, I had no idea who you were. I just thought you were really hot. And I just wanted to know you. But you felt so remote. You felt so unknowable at that
Yeah.
time.
And I think that even the online present, I was so like inaccessible.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
didn't know if you were even real. I still don't know if you're real.
I don't know either.
So, moving forward with this podcast, we decided to sort of loosely, not structure it, but we decided that every episode we would ask each other a question. Something personal. This is not really a podcast to talk about things on a conceptual or academic level. It's really about talking about things on a really personal level.
Mhm.
And so, for this first episode, in the spirit of the listeners getting to know us and hopefully us getting to know them eventually as well, we thought the best question to start with, and I will ask it to you right now, Adam, what is your gender?
um, I have to take a pause. It's such a big question. When we were outlining different questions for this podcast, and we aligned on gender, I was like, oh, yeah, great. That's like the great first one to start with. And then not that I was like preparing for it, but like I was like, what are we going to talk about with gender? And I kind of got very confused. I was gender confused very early in my discovery. Um, Mostly because I just didn't know where gender began or ended. Like,
Mm,
is it a biological sex thing? Is it a gender identity thing that we've constructed? Is it, masculine, feminine? Is it also romantic relationships? Like, it seems to touch so many aspects or to influence so many different aspects that it was kind of hard for me to pinpoint how do we enter this question.
yeah.
Um, so I'm going to go off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Um, I think that for me, my gender is a mix of things. I kind of think that I would step back and look at that in different contexts. It feels more male. In other contexts, it feels more female. And in other contexts, there's just no gender.
Right.
And then there's also like different times or phases in my life where I feel like there's just elements of me that feel more aligned with feminine energy, and connection with feminine energy is somewhere that I feel much more comfortable with.
Hmm.
And even like physicality, I think there is a male read to who I am. There's like a masculine, hairy man, like
Yeah.
caveman vibe. But yeah, I just couldn't pinpoint. Like, it's really easy to look at me and just say, okay, like this is male. And I believe aligning with female energy, or like the softer side of whatever we want to put labels to, is a path forward that we need to take in this world. Like,
Hmm.
the elements of masculine or male gender, it scares me. It
Yeah.
doesn't feel like the thing that I want to be close to. So I don't think I gave you an answer,
Not at all.
but
But
yes,
it is, I mean, there's so many things that I want to ask you in regards to what you just said.
sure.
Um, I guess let's start with appearance.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned that if someone were to look at you like on a strictly visual plane, you would read as like a cis male
Yeah.
and like quite male, like in what you just described, like hairy, muscular, beard, you know. So is how much would you say you actively cultivate that image? And does it align with how you feel?
Yeah.
And I guess if I could say it a bit more clearly, does visually presenting yourself as male, because you do put a lot of work into your body,
Mhm.
like, does the image that you cultivate that you then share with the world sort of provoke a kind of gender euphoria within you? Like, when you're aligned with that masculine image, does it make you feel euphoric within yourself because it's sort of lining up with how you feel inside?
It's a very complicated question. um, yeah, I guess that the physical component of my gender, I do think that it is male. Like, there is the beard. Like, I do not know what I look like without a beard. Not that I'm saying that a beard means that you are
No.
masculine, but there are some stereotypical qualities that are coded that way.
Right. Especially in the way that it connects with the other elements of your
Exactly.
appearance.
Yeah. And then I guess the idea of going to the gym and weightlifting and body sculpting to some capacity, um, I guess there's probably many body dysmorphic elements to all of that. I don't know if they're necessarily gender based, in that I'm trying to be perceived as a typical male. The idea of being controlled or eating well and um, training at the gym, it's really a big stress reliever for me. And it has a side effect of having positive impacts that I like in my body when I see it visually. It's less about being perceived as a male and more being perceived as somebody that's healthy and takes care of themselves.
Okay.
So it's less gendered, but I could see that it does, to the outside world, probably feel like, oh, performance of masculinity, acceptance in the queer
Hmm.
community, all of these things. But I find that I also really love the complexity of gender in the sense that, like, I love to wear feminine clothing or like these expressions of clothing that throw the person off. That's when I feel the most comfortable, is when I can express both elements of male or masculine or feminine, and then just sort of like exist in between. And there's problems with that. I might have beliefs that like having male qualities or traits might be more privileged or feel more safe
Right.
or accepted. But I've often felt that when I look at my personality and then like my actual gender, there's a lot of complexity there just because I'm not a loud person, I'm not a dominant person.
Right.
So that like when I do speak, it's actually much more quiet and
Yeah.
softer, and people expect that I should be more of this to have more space. And I'm like, no, like I'm quite comfortable with my softness in my personality. And I think that pulling these different elements throughout my identity is something that I've struggled with, but I feel much more comfortable with today and lean into those elements.
Wow. That's fascinating. But like, are there, so you talked about how you feel the most comfortable sort of when you're able to express both your masculinity and femininity.
Mhm.
Are there ever times where you derive, um, I don't know, either a sense of empowerment or um, even maybe like an arousal when like if you perform like hyper masculinity? Like, do you ever intentionally try to perform hyper masculinity?
It's completely the opposite. So I feel the most powerful when I wear feminine elements of fashion. Like
Okay.
it's so liberating to me. It's like I can put on this thing that I feel is androgynous or female oriented, and then I feel like there's a stronger alignment in myself, and then I feel much more confident. Whenever I teeter into performing something that's masculine, I often feel like this is an imposter or like this is not comfortable, and it never gives me a positive
Okay.
output.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you could control how people perceive you and
Hmm.
your gender identity, what would be the ideal perception?
um,
Or I guess contrarily, does it bother you when people see you and just read you as like alpha male?
I don't think about it so much. I think that I'm just trying to be safe. Like
Mm,
that's my feeling when I'm interacting with the world. It's like, am I safe? How do I position myself to stay safe? And that's something that I've just never been able to get over in my life. And when people categorize me, or if somebody labels me as something, I'm like, well, you obviously don't know me, is
right.
the reaction that I have. And it never really feels like it weighs me down. It's like something that's thrown at me, but just kind of misses me or
Hmm.
ricochets off because it just doesn't feel like it's coming for me or
Right.
at me.
And like you're someone who basically only dates men.
Yeah.
Um, how does your or not your masculinity, but your gender identity in all that it encompasses,
Yeah.
like how does it factor into like your romantic life? Like, have you ever been with someone where you've felt like a pressure to perform masculinity? Have you ever been with someone where you felt like your feminine side was not as accepted?
For sure. I think that like we can even talk about my current relationship. Like there's often a lot of insecurity because of the person that I'm in a relationship with, in my view, has like very strong like masculine Greek god body context, and it brings up a lot of insecurities for me, like, oh,
Mm,
am I too feminine sometimes, or am I not fit enough? All of these insecurities start creeping in, but my partner does not give me any of those indications, and if anything is very aware of my insecurities and
right.
helps me through those things. So um, for sure, I historically have questioned those things, like, you know, how am I perceived as probably more influenced that way than, say, a stranger on the street that
Right.
is like, oh, perceiving you in
Yeah.
this regard. So yeah, it's something that I still work on to this day.
But I'm guessing that for you, like to be in a relationship with someone, I'm assuming that you need to feel safe enough to express your feminine side and
Yeah.
that you with that within that safety won't feel a fear of like turning them off with your feminine side.
I think what I've learned over the last few years is people truly want to know me and want to love me. And that's really hard for me to accept. And any moment where I show vulnerability or like expressions of who I really am, they've just been met with so much love. Like
Mm,
people will stop and just say like, I've loved that I seen that side of you,
right.
or like, and it might even be something really small that I didn't even notice. It's not like an intentional performance of
Right.
like gender or whatever. This is like across the spectrum, but it's kind of wild for me to just be like, the more that I sit into myself, the more love that I receive and the stronger that I connect to the people that I care the most with.
Mm,
And I think that's all that I really want.
yeah.
And I've just built so many systems to not allow that, thinking that it's to be safe.
Yeah.
And I think that like gender played a role in that as well. Like the confusion of my sexual identity, trying to feel comfortable in masculine, feminine energy, like all of these things were tools that blocked me from truth or knowing and connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you wish you were trans?
um, Not necessarily trans, but I really do believe in non-binary. Like I
Mm,
really would love to live in a world that is gender fluid, that it's less like a permanent marker that's labeled on you, and that it's more like I'm having an experience of male or female in this context in this moment and feeling comfortable with that. And I do think that like, you know, the world would be so much stronger if we could lean into those elements of embracing
yeah.
gender in different ways instead of it being something that's fixed on a person and like permeant throughout their whole life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we talked a lot about me,
No,
and
but I have
that's
one more question.
okay.
That might be a little bit too much.
Much too much.
Like, well, just phrase it the most blunt way that I possibly can. Do you like having a penis?
Well, it's a good question. Gender and sexuality are interrelated in some ways, and it's really interesting. Like, I'm currently in a phase of like, I have a tendency to become very cerebral and sort of disconnect from my body
Mm,
and disconnect even from my physicality, and even sometimes just depersonalization of my identity, because I can be so thought and um, pondering driven day to day that I can actually get lost in my mind.
right.
And um, where am I on the sexuality spectrum? Like, am I more asexual or
Hmm.
more sexual? And like, there's a lot of contradictions there for me.
Yeah.
And like right now, I'm in this moment of being very cerebral and not connected to my sexual components. And then other phases, I am much more of a sexual driven person.
Right.
And yeah, right now, I'm having a hard time connecting to my body and my sexual nature. And when I look in the mirror and I see a penis, it's kind of a bit overwhelming, because I'm like, oh, whoa, I am a sexual person. And this is something that I use, and it connects me and aligns me to a stronger version of myself. And it kind of like helps me pull me back into my body. And
Right.
so there's like a pendulum swing that happens in my sexuality. And I do like having a penis, and I do like having sex with people that have penises. I feel like it's just something that's like there and obvious, and it indicates a lot of things about how a person is feeling. And I
Right.
like that, like presence
Right.
in the space.
The presence of a boner.
Yes. That was also the other name we considered for this podcast.
Yeah, we should have called this podcast The Presence of a Boner. It's a
Yeah.
good name. It's a good title.
Can we switch now? Can I ask you some questions?
Sure.
Yeah, so one that I'm kind of interested to know from you is, can you remember the moment that you became aware of your gender? In whatever form.
Right. That's a great question. I don't know, because I think that I've always felt that feminine energy so strongly, and without even having to ever think about it. Like, it was always so natural. From very early on, I just naturally gravitated towards things that we think of as feminine, even something as like simple as like fairy tales.
Mm-hmm.
This idea that, like, especially when we were younger, that was something for girls, even though I don't think anything is for girls or for boys, is also arbitrary. But I remember, among the many things that I was bullied for as a kid, even one day, like, being bullied for reading a book of fairy tales.
Yeah.
So I don't think there was a moment where I was consciously aware of it. I think there was a moment in kindergarten, or not a moment, I think it was like literally the first day of school. It's not a memory that I have clearly, but it's just a feeling of when I started to go to school, just the understanding that I wasn't like other people.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't necessarily an understanding of my gender identity, but it was an understanding that there was something about me and the way that I moved through the world that was either not okay or just different.
Yeah.
But I knew, like, even at 5, that whatever it was making me a target.
Yeah.
For like really intense like bullying and hatred, often from older kids, which made it like really scary and much harder to navigate. So I just knew that I had to hide my femininity as much as possible in order to protect myself. Like you were talking about, like, I think Me Too in general in my life, I've always moved through the world trying to be as safe as I can.
Yeah.
Like, that's also something that I've looked for my whole life, and have often sacrificed parts of me in order to have that safety and security. Yeah. But I never pretended to be one of the boys either. Like, I might have silenced my femininity to like protect it and protect myself, but I never pretended to be one of the boys. And the very small handful of times that I did try were always like epic failures. Like one summer I tried to play baseball and it was a nightmare. But I loved the maroon uniform. But yeah, I think it's still something like you that I'm like figuring out. And I think that, when I said to you, like, I think the first question for the podcast should be, what is your gender? Like, I agree with you that on the surface, it's a pretty straightforward question, but the more you think about it, the harder it is to answer. Yeah. And, even for me, like, I'm not like, a lot of trans women ideally, in their ideal, would like to become a cis woman or as close to being a cis woman as possible.
Yeah.
I don't feel like that's me. Like, I don't feel like I'm trying to become cisgender, even though I think it would make my life a lot easier if I was.
Yeah.
Like, if I was just a cis male or if I was just a cis woman, I know for a fact my life would be a lot easier, not just externally, but I think even internally. Like, I think that I would just be more at ease within myself and like probably more confident and less scared.
For sure.
So I feel like right now the term that I use most is like trans feminine. Because like you, like I also like boys' clothes. Like, I love men's button-up shirts and like patterns and like all the different styles that they come in. And I think that like in my daily life, I prefer just like a more androgynous approach. One, because it does create a kind of safety for me. Yeah. But also I think that feminine ideals are so exaggerated and so difficult to achieve.
Hmm.
Like even for cis women,
Yeah.
like the pressure of hyper femininity or the pressure to perform that or create that, it's very demanding. It demands a lot of time, like just like waxing your legs, doing your makeup, doing your hair. Like it's very time consuming and it's very draining.
Hmm.
And like, I can't do that every day. Like, I do derive a certain amount of like gender euphoria when I perform like hyper femininity, but I can't do that every day. And I don't want to be a prisoner of it.
Yeah. No, I completely understand that. The idea of consistently spending hours a day to create something that performs to this idea of what a gender should be. I mean, I could even argue that like going to the gym for an hour a day is like me performing
Right.
to put on this gender role or skin, and it can be exhausting at some point. Like, how do we just exist for who we are? And this is like a big like question or thing that would be liberating to escape from.
Exactly. But I think unfortunately, we just derive so much visually.
Hmm.
Even when I think of like attraction and the way that a part of it is
Yeah.
physical, is visual,
Yeah.
And I think that that is something that has been really challenging for me, like as a trans feminine person, um, who doesn't necessarily like present high femme all the time, like, and I'm attracted to men,
Hmm.
and often those men are straight. Like the men that tend to be drawn to me tend to be straight.
Yeah.
And so I feel very often that like even within those relationships, I'm like performing,
Mhm.
you know? And sometimes that performance feels sexy and it feels good and it can be arousing and exciting. Um, but then other times I feel like there's no space for me to just be me.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that makes me think too that like it's gonna be, or like, I mean, it already has been up until this point, like just who's ever gonna love me in that way? Like,
Hmm.
am I ever gonna meet someone that whose feelings for me won't change based on how I'm presenting visually,
Sure.
Luckily, I'm happily single, but like, yeah, I just wonder, like, I don't know.
Yeah. And then, I mean, we'll definitely have more episodes that talk about
For
relationships
sure.
and like the complexity of all
Uh,
those things. We'll definitely have to unpack.
I guess just like my frustration is just that like whether I have short or long hair, or like whether I'm wearing jeans and a
Hmm.
t-shirt or a dress, like what does that really change?
Yeah.
Does it change a lot? I guess for some people it does
Hmm.
change a lot, but I'm just like,
Right.
I'm not any different. I'm the
Right.
same person, like regardless,
Hmm.
I guess like there's an element of me that's just like, I guess could be labeled as just like gender non-conforming.
Yeah.
Like I don't conform to what like the stereotypical idea of a woman is. And even the word woman like kind of makes me uncomfortable, like I don't necessarily think that I'm a woman,
Hmm.
you know? Definitely not a man.
Yeah, I think like I kind of have a question that's rooted in that. So when you were talking about your youth and this sort of understanding of gender and that you knew what it was not, and you were like either hiding or showing things, in queer theory, there's like this reference to disorientation that
Mm,
we at a young age we see these roles of male and female, and then like you get put in them and you're like, this is not who I am. This doesn't feel right. And then, like, you kind of just reorient your body or your whole existence in a different way. And it just feels very disorienting because we don't necessarily know where it's pointing to. We don't have the examples. We don't necessarily have the community to give us support. Like, I think about the moments where, like, I tried on a hockey uniform and I played a hockey game and I was like, what the hell? Like, who? That is not me.
yeah.
And then, like, seeing pictures of myself wearing a young girl's nightie, feeling that was so fun and deviant,
Yeah.
and but also knowing that I better hide that picture. And I think that we've been so lucky in our generation to find language and vocabulary like the idea of trans and how it's permeated throughout society, and that we have these ways of talking about gender
Yeah.
in new ways, which I think helped a lot of us orient in some ways
Yeah.
and also cause problems because language puts limits and boundaries.
But also,
But
it took us, our generation, so long to get that language. I
right.
mean, and the generation before us didn't even get it
Yeah.
at all until like really later on in life, you
Yeah.
know? Um, there's always this, I mean, it's pointless, but like there's always this question in my mind of like how different would my life have been if I had access to the language
Hmm.
earlier on, or even if my mom had had access to it, you
Yeah.
know? Because when I was a kid, like I really profoundly felt like one of the girls,
Hmm.
like profoundly. But, at that time, like that didn't even seem like a possibility.
Hmm.
Like it felt like I was condemned to a gender.
Sure.
Felt like I was condemned to being a boy, which I really did not want to be,
Hmm.
and it felt like that condemnation blocked me off from so many things. Like I remember even having like in elementary school girlfriends whose moms wouldn't let me come to the sleepover party,
Yeah.
and I would feel so outcasted. But I was like, but I'm one of the girls too. Like it just
Right.
felt so unfair.
Yeah.
And I also think those moms of the 90s were so fucked up. Like, we're 8 years old.
Yeah.
Like, even if I was a boy, what the hell do you think is going to happen?
So if you compare that youthful disorientation and we think about your gender expression today, do you feel that you've landed somewhere that is like an orientation that works for you? Is it still something that's in progress? Do you feel that
Mm,
the world is aligning to it? Like, what is happening in that space?
I think it's still in progress for sure.
Okay.
I don't think that I've fully landed on a rigid identity, and maybe I don't have to,
Okay.
you know? Because I also like, who would if I were to really just sort of like choose a gender and stick to it, who would that benefit? Like it might make some of my social encounters easier, and less awkward,
Yeah.
but that's just because of them. It's not necessarily what I want for myself. I also think about, this might sound really absurd, but like we watched this together, like The Handmaid's Tale. And there was a scene where in one of the flashbacks, when you see like how the world devolved to where they ended up, there was this moment where like all of the, like in the banking systems, all of the accounts that had a female gender marker were automatically frozen.
Yeah.
And so like in terms of my legal life, like on all of my IDs, on
Hmm.
my bank accounts, like it's all says male. It all has my dead name.
Yeah.
And I have no interest in changing it, especially
Okay.
not with the way things are going in the world now.
Right.
Like, so there's a part of me that is even still holding on to a certain amount of like male privilege, quote
Yeah.
unquote, like very much discreetly and not in a way that really has any bearing in my life. And I know for some people, like it's really important to have that name change and to have the gender marker changed on the IDs and the accounts, which I totally understand and support, obviously. But like, not only just in terms of like a hypothetical end of the world situation where like women are stripped of everything they own, even putting that aside, I just don't really care what's on a piece of
Right.
paper. Like that truly has no bearing on my life. I could not care less. I hate anything bureaucratic. I try to involve myself in the least amount of government procedures as possible. Like just the thought of even going through the process of changing things, I'm like, I think I'd rather die.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I guess I don't know how to answer your question, honestly. Like
Right.
I, yeah, I think it's like you said it a moment ago. Like I would, and I do feel the most at ease and the most gender euphoric, and the most safe with the people who I know really see me.
Yeah.
Like they see my feminine energy, they see my energy,
Hmm.
period. They understand who I am as a person, and what the visual presentation is doesn't ever alter that. I just wish that I could feel that every day with everyone,
Yeah.
but it's not possible. And I mean, there are some cis people who are gender nonconforming as well,
Hmm.
like with all the debate around bathrooms and, you know, protecting cis female spaces, I've heard many stories from cis women who do not conform to female visual standards who are experiencing problems.
Yeah.
Like one woman who was bald because of cancer treatments, and there was this woman in the bathroom who told her to leave the bathroom because she thought she was a man,
Right.
you know, or like even that athlete at the Olympics this past summer who was being accused of being trans when she's a cis woman, but just
Hmm.
because her appearance doesn't conform to this perfect femininity that we've all grown up with.
Yeah.
So I just think gender complicates everyone's life, or
Yeah.
a lot of us.
Sure.
I think the people who really embody in an authentic way, and I don't know how many of them there are actually out there if we're really talking about true authenticity, but the people who do really, like the cis women who really adhere to the sort of perfect traditional femininity as society has defined it, and the men who perfectly fit into the male equivalent of that,
Hmm.
like I think there is an ease that they have moving through the world that a lot of us don't have and will never have.
I have one big question before I get to like sort of a couple smaller fun
Okay.
questions. But what is the future of gender? We're in such a challenging time right now. It seems like there's a contraction of ideas. There's like being a block of how we move forward or even a step back. But then at the same time, there just seems to be like this acceleration towards like genderless, or the world is being able to understand the
Hmm.
concept further. So like I'm kind of curious about what are the tensions between these two tracks that seem to be moving, and
Yeah.
what is going to evolve from that, and what sort of things might we see in the world.
Well, it's really scary, honestly. I think that, like, if you asked me that question even 5 years ago, I would have said that I think we are on the track towards a future that, if not totally gender neutral,
Yeah.
then at least would be prismatic in the sense that there would be room for all the gender expressions without any judgment, with a sort of innate understanding. It really felt like that's where we were headed. I
Hmm.
do think that would be the ideal direction because I do think that um, there is something that can be really fun or arousing or empowering about gender expression or even role playing
Yeah.
or fantasy. Um, I do think that there should be space for that. Um, but I think that unfortunately, we're really in this moment of backsliding. But I don't know who said it, and I'm sure there are many people saying it, but that fascism is actually what happens when corporate interests take over. And I think
Mhm.
that there is a corporate interest in having us be women and men only
Right.
in the most basic sense.
Hmm.
Because that ensures that people are still having kids, people are buying houses,
Hmm.
people are basically staying in the system.
Yeah.
When people start becoming more queer or gender nonconforming, it is often, I think, related to a kind of anti-capitalism,
Hmm.
you know, because it's kind of saying no to the system. It's kind of saying, I'm going to do my own thing on my own terms. And I think the system losing that control is really dangerous for them.
For
It
sure.
threatens their existence. And they know that. And I think that we're really feeling that buckling down of like,
Hmm.
they're not going to let us have this really beautiful, prismatic future,
Hmm.
which is scary and sad. But I think more than ever, we have to turn, as corny and cliche as it sounds like, we really do have to turn to community,
Yeah.
you know, and just create circles of people in our lives who understand these issues, who understand the necessary freedom that we each need and deserve to express ourselves from moment to moment. Like, I don't
Hmm.
think any of us should, like I said before, like, and even when I was saying it, I had never expressed it that way before, but nobody should be condemned to a gender identity.
Yeah.
It should be a
Exactly.
choice, and that choice can change, that choice can evolve. I think the freedom to express who we are period is so important.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea of a future where we do not have that freedom is very scary. And I think that that lack of freedom, even for cis men, is very dangerous. And
Mm-hmm.
like, we're all very well aware of how harmful masculinity can be.
Sure.
Like, I always say this, but like, I don't think it's a coincidence that the suicide rates are much higher for men than they are for women.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think that that's a coincidence, because I think that the majority of men are being condemned to a gender identity that they feel this pressure and obligation to uphold.
Yeah.
And they sense a kind of failure within themselves and their respective communities if they don't perform that.
Yeah. I'm even going back in my own thoughts and like re-updating based on this conversation. Kept saying throughout my answers, aligning to a more feminine or female energy is super important. But I would even just step back and think that the fluidity of experiencing both male and female versus it being a descriptor or a label, we can have these moments of existing within all of us. And maybe that makes us more softer, more connected, more aligned, and harder when we need to be more hard, and versus it being just like one way of mode of operating for your entire life.
Yeah, exactly. I think fluidity is the perfect word. And like, I think that that's a much more encompassing and exciting word and concept than neutral.
I have a couple quick rapid fire just to set the tone to be a little lighter.
Okay.
Feel free to take these questions in any way you want.
Okay.
If your gender identity had a theme song, what would it be?
I'm not a girl, not yet a woman.
If gender roles were decided by what toppings you put on your pizza, what would you choose to represent you?
Oh my God. Well, I love pepperoni. I love any kind of meat on my pizza.
Sausage, you're saying?
Sausage, meat, salami, pepperoni, bacon.
Okay.
Yeah. It's very masculine.
Very masculine pizza you're eating.
I know, but there's that energy in me too. Sometimes it's rare that it shows up, but it can be there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have one last question. So yes or no.
Okay.
Do you think that clothing should come with a disclaimer that states may cause gender confusion?
No, I think everything you put on should surprise you.
That's a good answer.
I think that's a good place to wrap this first episode up. Is there anything that you feel that you haven't said about your gender that feels important to you to express?
No, I think that this is a topic that will weave in and out of other conversations. So I'm excited to see where we land. I think the important thing to say to the audience is that we are learning and we are developing language together, and our understanding and our points of saying things is basically from the point in which we stand right now. And that as we progress as people, as we progress on this podcast, our knowledge and our understanding will change. We're not fixed people. So I think it's important to the listener to just approach us with care when we're having these conversations, that we're being vulnerable and we are open and excited to evolve our own understanding of the topics that we unfold.
I think that's so beautifully said, honestly. If I can translate it for the audience, it means get off our damn backs, okay? Don't DM us. Actually, you can DM us. We're so excited for this project. We're going to be releasing new episodes every 2 weeks, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single one.
If you love this mental roller coaster, drop us a 5-star rating and share with a friend who's not afraid to go deep.
Speaking of deep, follow us on Instagram at Gotta Be Deep.
Our theme song is Wipe My Memory Clean by Farron Isles.